Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartwout. Today's guest is Eric Olsen. Eric is a professor of industrial technology at Cal Poly, but as you will see, he wears many hats. On today's show, we had planned to talk about the usual: process improvement, lean methodologies, and Lean Six Sigma. But you know how conversations go in 2025. We found ourselves talking about artificial intelligence and its impact on how we work. That's 2025 in a nutshell, right? So while this episode takes us more into AI than our usual lean and operational excellence talk, the insights are just as valuable for anyone looking to stay ahead in the world of continuous improvement. Don't worry though, we'll have Eric back on the show soon to cover those more traditional topics we originally planned to explore. But now, my AI conversation with Eric Olsen. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Eric Olsen. Eric is a professor of industrial technology at Cal Poly State University, has a PhD from my alma mater, the Ohio State University. He's the lead of the Future of People at Work, there's just so many things that we can talk about today. Eric, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, no, Dan, glad to be here. And maybe little of those titles is maybe I have an inability to say no. It's kind of like I don't have an ability to say no to podcasts. So here we go.
We'll take advantage of that inability to say no. I cut myself off when I said Central. I didn't finish that with Central Coast Lean. Yep. There's just so many things that you're involved in, so many things that we could talk about. Yep. First, if you could just give me a little bit of background about yourself. I know you spent 20 years in industry before you moved into academics. What started that transition and how does it shape the way you teach Lean today?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking it. Well, so started out, I got my degree in forest engineering from the University of Maine, which doesn't quite have the same sort of cachet, but I think forest engineering, just ag engineering with really big plants. But every job I took, I seemed to move further away from the forest. So I started out working for Caterpillar Tractor in Peoria for a couple of years. Then I worked for a division of Lytton while I was getting my MBA at Virginia Tech. And then after that, I started kind of the part of my career that really sort of started me on more of a lean journey. I was working for Hewlett Packard in the Bay Area. And I did that for about 11 years, culminating in a 2-year experience as their worldwide manufacturing education manager. Wow. Within the components group, and spent a lot of time traveling around to different parts of the world in Singapore and Malaysia, trying to get people to understand the importance of cycle time and process improvement and how it could affect their organizations. And that's kind of where I caught the bug for this sort of thing. And when HP was offering some severance packages to right size and downsize some of our operation, I took the buyout and kind of surprised my wife and said, well, maybe I want to go back and get my PhD. And she said, no, wrong answer. But I did, and took me to Ohio State, ran into some great people at MoreSteam and, different people in the community. Found out that I didn't invent all this lean stuff, that it was actually written down in books and people had laid a really sort of nice foundation. And from there, my first job on the other side was at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and been here 20 years. So 20 years in industry, 20 years in academia, and still getting into trouble, it turns out. So there you go.
When you were at Ohio State, did you interact with Peg Pennington and Peter Ward while you were there?
Yeah, so Peter Ward was my dissertation advisor at Ohio State, so I know him, really well.
I've got to say, this is a podcast first because Peter Ward has been a guest on this show. So this is the first time we've had a dissertation advisor and the dissertation writer. What's the correct term for that, Eric?
Well, we could just go with student, you
The
know.
student. We've never had that before on the podcast, and this might be a first for all podcasts. So thank you, Eric.
Yeah, well, hopefully Peter's not watching this and fact checking me on the things I'm going to say or what I'm going to come up with. But yeah, so Peter was my advisor. Peg was a lecturer at the time, and
Mhm.
our paths crossed, occasionally in and out of the program there. But really, um, the real sort of friendship and the cross career bonding and interaction was really probably more post PhD than during the PhD program. So I've gotten to know both those guys really well since graduating too.
And Peg was just at the Future of People at Work conference, right?
Right, right. So Peg was at the symposium there, and we got a chance to interact. And MoreSteam was our only sponsor. Yeah, we sort of sent out a call for people that wanted to sponsor. One of the things about the Future People at Work, and I think we can talk a little bit more about this, but a little bit of challenge when people go to your typical conferences or they go to even a place like MoreSteam. There's a very specific ask in that they want this training or they want to develop this capability or they want to take this back. The future people work is a lot broader sort of concept where we're talking about, okay, it's not only about lean or Six Sigma, but maybe it's also theory constraints. Maybe it's, design thinking. What are the things that we put together and how do they work together in order to make the whole improvement process community better and stronger? Because
Right.
I think, as you look at these sorts of different methodologies and approaches, you understand that there's a lot of underlying commonality. And
Hmm.
maybe, our language is different. There's a few Japanese words here and there that other groups don't necessarily use. But when you drill down into the principles, a lot of similarity in those underlying principles, right?
I was going to jump to this a little bit later, but since you mentioned it,
Yeah.
the future of people at work, you kind of laid out a little bit the vision of what it is. What exciting things do you see coming for the future of people at work? Because you've got to be forward thinking, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, I think one of the insights, so as we've kind of gone through this future of people at work exercise, I think of it as a series of conversations that build on each other and interact and expand as we go forward. Interesting thing when I ask people, what are you concerned about in the future? Like what do you see going forward? What interesting or insider response is that just because we're going into the future and there's AI and there's virtual teams and there's blockchain and supply chain integration, all kinds of things going on, doesn't mean that our old problems have gone away, right?
Right.
They stay with us and they go forward and they take them forward. It's still, even in the future, it's about, well, how do we get to engage people in problem solving? How do we become better managers of people and to help people realize their potential and their capability? So those things don't go away. There's a different spin. It's like, okay, well, how do we engage people now that AI is in the picture? Like, what does that look like? And um, just to, I get excited about different ideas and things like in this realm, but there's a lot of discussion about, if you're using AI to do your analysis, say like you're using AI to do an A3 or, help you with sort of the problem solving, then the people are not gaining that capability or that practice, right? Because they're not doing the
Mhm.
work. And we run the same thing as a professor with students, right? It's okay if you're having AI do your homework, you're not learning, as much. You're not developing your own capability. But by the same token, we also know that if something is really good, fast, and very effective at doing things, it's really hard to compete with that thing, right? So if the A3 can do it better, faster, more efficiently or effectively, we as human beings need to figure out, okay, I'm going to lose that battle. I'm not going to say, therefore, I'm not going to do AI to do that thing. It's doing it better, faster, and easier, right? I've got to figure out a different way to contribute, to the total value proposition, to the value that we're creating. And so, I think part of that future of people work is understanding, well, what are, with these new changes and things that are going on, the automation, what is the new role for human beings in the system? Like, how can you continue? What can you do better than AI? Or what can you help AI do so that AI is better? Because it's a system answer, right? It's a system creating the value. And it's not just AI, it's not just the people, but it's how that interaction, that whole thing goes together.
Eric, how would you do that? How would you, as AI is becoming more a part of your work, how do you look to find that extra value that you can add as a person?
Yeah.
That's got to be the probably the first challenge to face. I've got AI, I want to adopt it. I need to find my value. How do I go about doing that?
Yeah. I don't know as I have like the answer, but I feel like I am engaged in trying to figure that out.
Right.
So my approach is basically I'm going to learn by doing, right? So my AI of choice is Claude AI by Anthropic, right? So
Okay.
I was on ChatGPT and I was doing some things, and somebody said, "Hey, try this Claude thing," and I did, and I really liked it, and then I've been sticking with it. And I know in the conversation, it's like, oh, there's all these different AI bots and different sort of things. I'm kind of saying, okay, I'm going to go deep and learn this sort of one AI, system really well. And I use it for everything. I use it for my daily work. I try this, try that, lots of different ways of looking at what exactly can AI do. And I think, just sort of analogously, there's been certain points in my life where I had the ability, or not the ability, kind of the fortuitous opportunity to jump on a trend early.
Right.
So, I said, degree in forest engineering, but I did a lot of drafting and mechanical stuff. So I started making with Litton, we were making in defense industries, sliding electrical contacts, rotary joint, electric signals through rotary interfaces. So think about tank turrets and periscopes, right? Signals going through. People started coming along and said, well, we got to get these fiber optic signals through this rotary joint. And how do you do that? And what does that look like? And so I got into fiber optics, relatively early on in the early 80s, and kind of rode that, through a big part of my engineering career after that. But degree in forest engineering, there were physicists. There were no fiber optic engineers at the time. This stuff was too new. You had to learn it on the street, if you will. Similarly with lean, I got in like early 90s. I was kind of say, okay, here I'm at Hewlett Packard, this great storied company. You read about it in Search of Excellence. They're a great company. So I was expecting just sit back and say, okay, well, show me how, things are done, and fighting fires, running around in circles, the same sort of thing you see in a lot of different companies. And I started asking, well, like, how do you win at this manufacturing job here? Like, what does winning look like? And somebody started pointing me towards, some work by Dick Schomburger, who did some early work on, world class manufacturing and Japanese manufacturing techniques. And I looked at that and said, hey, this looks like it's an answer, and started taking us back to some of my engineering friends and kind of got on with that. And just by the fact that I was in early and just doing the work, made me a expert, right?
Right.
Area. And I'm getting that similar feeling with AI. And, if people are out there thinking that the boat's already left, I'm telling you, the boat's still relatively at the dock and figuring this out. So just get in there and just start doing it. Just start trying. You can be, you could be cautious and afraid of AI, and I think it's right to be sort of cautious and suspicious. But I'm thinking, if AI are going to be our robot overlord someday, I'm going to know as much about them as I can by the time I get there. And they'll either decide, hey, we either got to keep Eric Olsen around or we got to kill him real quick because he knows too much about us. But to that end, just learning, getting in there and learning about AI, what can it do? So for example, and this maybe has some more steamish implications, right? Because you guys are in a learning and training domain, just like I am in higher education. But there's a lot of discussion in the community, the future people at work community, and other communities I'm involved with about, well, could we make AI be like a mentor or a coach,
Hmm.
right? And I
I've
know,
heard that.
and I know MoreSteam's got Hexy in there, sort of coaching you on statistics and things that you guys do in engine room and whatnot. But even simply, I do a thing where I'll do some hiking on some of the nice local hikes we have here in San Luis Obispo in California, and just like hour long things. But I'll listen to podcasts, and as I'm listening to the podcasts, I'll stop and record a little note to myself on a Gmail message, right, using voice, and put that in there. I was thinking, well, we have the capability now so that you could maybe get on Zoom, start a book on tape on what your favorite lean book is or whatever you're doing, and as you're listening to the book, record, oh, I think this would apply to my work situation, or I should tell my friends about this, or this makes me think about this other thing. And you can insert your own conversation into the podcast or the text, take that whole thing as a transcript recording in Zoom, and say, okay, what are my personal action items or reflections on these concepts and books? And what can I do? And eventually, if that's all in there, then you can start asking the AI questions about this, right? It says, okay, even though I said this, now I want to do this. And you're building a body of knowledge or a reservoir or a way to enhance your training. So maybe that's a little bit about what, the future of education looks like, at least for me, as an older learner, sort of going in. I'm going to, tap into some books and podcasts and maybe use that as a way to get my additional learning fix.
When I was relatively new using AI, when I attended MoreSteam's 2023 Best Practices for Operational Excellence conference, and one of the speakers was talking about AI and mentioned that there's a reason it's called Chat GPT,
Yeah.
is because you continuously engage.
Right.
You've got it'll give you an answer, and then you say, well, I like this, I don't like this, I want it more like this, and it'll continually keep getting more and more refined till it gets what you want and learns what you want.
Right.
And I think that was a little bit of a hurdle for me,
Yeah.
that it's not like a calculator. You hit the button, it gives you an answer.
Right.
You keep continually working at it.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a way in which you can take concepts you're learning about right now, apply them to things you're dealing with right now, and it'll give you answers about that specific scenario.
Right. Right.
Wow.
Because you're doing the learning in context, right? So they call it a general language model, right? Or the chatting sort of part of it. And yeah, you can be sort of open, but you can also be domain specific or context specific. And you say, okay, take the knowledge from this book or this podcast. I'm worrying about my situation at work and whatnot. Let's talk about this podcast in the context of this situation, right? I'm interested in connecting up with other people that are interested in these sorts of probes or experimenting. even going bigger, say we had a thing where, this is probably not going to be the right podcast for this sort of thing, but maybe it is.
Uh-huh.
But if you had a dozen or two of your, friends or colleagues all listening to the same podcast and also contributing into the same sort of chat about the podcast and sharing their reflections back and forth, it's always amazing to me what can be generated. And maybe this is sort of where, talking about, well, what's going to be in it for humans in the long run, but that creative input of human beings into an AI neural network that can help you sort of see the other side of ideas or flip things around or note connections that we as human beings can't really see. But because of that neural network capability, it can make those connections for you, right? Once you get this sort of knowledge and connections and the deep conversations about how work's going to work in the future, how do we drive that to real substantive change in organizations, right? How do you turn that conversation into action or usable stuff?
Maybe this is part of how you find value, added value as a person as AI becomes more prevalent. You are the person who's most adept at working with the AI. Like the statistical concepts are statistical concepts that anybody could use, but there are people who are the best at them. And maybe you become the best at utilizing AI.
Right.
And it's amazing to me how fast this has come because I remember a webinar from MoreSteam about AI from about a year and a half ago, and they were talking about using AI to affinitize data. Well, that seemed really cool. And now here we are a year and a half later, we're talking about AI giving us answers to problems as we're learning about new concepts simultaneously. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really pretty exciting, the things that you can do. And I don't, and this is where, you talk about, well, you can be the best at it. I'm kind of surprised at how easy it is to become the best. So for myself right now, people know that I do, this AI stuff. And whenever write a blog now, I do very little of my own, my purely own writing. It's always, AI augmented, and reviewed
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. So I'm going in there to do it. And I let people know, like right at the bottom of the blog, it's like, this was, augmented with Claude AI and reviewed by a human being, because I get enough students that are trying to slip one past me and say, hey, this is my own work. And as professors, we get a little bit, well, we're all jaded, of course, but we get pretty good at spotting like the AI things. Is I'll get a student, one thing is, human beings will not do this, but you can't have a 4-part response where every part is exactly, 3.5 sentences long, and equally sort of formatted. And students don't do that. That's not a human thing to do, right? That's definitely AI generated, but it's an interesting world, and there's lots of different ways to look at it, lots of different ways to play, and still tons of opportunity to figure out how you can use it and create value in the system.
Have you ever used one of those AI detectors like GPT-0 or Zero GPT to run something through it and see whether we think this is AI or not?
Actually, no, I never have.
Okay.
I know they exist. I have a thing in my classes where I tell students, I said, okay, AI is going to be, it's a thing. We tried to stop calculators. We're not going to be able to stop AI. We know it's there. Just please tell me you're using it, and tell me what version you're using, so we can all learn together on what the best practices are for using these sorts of things. So, but by the same token, students are explicit about using AI. Students try to pass it by you using AI without telling you, but it is pervasive.
You know, Eric just mentioned how pervasive this has become, and I couldn't agree more. People using AI to write stuff and putting their name on it like
Like
they
they
did
did
the
the work
work
themselves.
themselves.
I mean,
I mean,
come
come
on.
on.
That's just
Just
straight up
real.
dishonest. It's like cheating yourself out of actually learning something. Anyway, we'll be right back after this short break.
MoreSteam's enterprise process improvement platform includes the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. Visit MoreSteam.com to learn more. And now back to my conversation with Eric Olsen. Eric, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and just as I feared, I did not get to many of the questions I wanted to ask and many of the topics I wanted to cover. So one, I hope you'll join us again in the future because I feel there's so much more to discuss. And two, the next guest on the show will be Josh Howell. So is there anything you'd like me to tell Josh from you?
Yeah. Well, Josh Howell's a great person. He's LEI, the Lean Enterprise Institute, is one of we call them the .orgs. There's 7, and now since the symposium, we're up to 9 organizations that are collaborating, trying to try to decide, what lean is going to be about moving into the future. Josh is one of the spearheads in this whole kind of effort. He's on our steering team, and I really value his advice and his encouragement on this. I would ask Josh, where he thinks the future of people at work should go. Like what kind of challenges and things should they take on? The world always needs help. I think it always needs lean. I think lean provides a platform, a way of thinking that can really make the world a better place. And how we position it going forward in the future. I think Josh is going to be instrumental in helping us shape that. LEI is a big, powerful, lean organization, done a lot of good in the world, and I think they're going to continue to do good and help us move forward.
Eric, I love it because one, I love that answer. And two, I loved the fact that you have created a story arc that links people listening to this episode to make them want to listen to the next episode. You got to hear what Josh says about the future of people at work too. So that was fantastic. Eric, thank you again so much. I'll have in the show notes links to all of your various endeavors. So we might have to have a second page, but I appreciate you so much. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, Dan, it was great talking to you, and I really enjoyed this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Also, please go ahead and visit our website, moresteam.com, to learn about the software and tools that can help you solve problems, eliminate waste, and do things better. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.